evening, everybody. Welcome to the Finance Committee meeting. Today is Tuesday, January 14th, 2025. I guess we can start, as we normally do, with introductions. Colin, we'll start there and come around.
Perfect. Colin Wiesel, Town Manager.
Earl Mason.
Larry Clausen, Chairperson.
Ed Smith.
Carolyn Scafidi.
And Ralph Catalano.
Okay. Second on our list on the agenda is public comment. I'm seeing no public and hearing no comment. We can move to number 3, meeting minutes. Can I get a motion?
Mr. Chair, I'd like to make a motion to approve the minutes for January 2nd, 2025 as written.
Fantastic. Do I have a second? Perfect. All in favor of approving the minutes for January 2nd, 2025, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstained? Okay, we are good to go with the minutes. Okay, and we're going to discuss the FY 2026 budget and long-term financial planning. I will turn it over to Colin.
Thank you. I don't have a lengthy presentation for you, and I'm not going to resurface the presentation I gave you last time, but I did want to present the path to a balanced budget. As I'll cover, there's still a lot of unknowns. Our biggest unknown is how much the health insurance increase will be, but for the purposes of this demonstration, I presented to the Select Board on January 6th a balanced budget. It's on the town's website if folks want to see all that information under the Town Manager's page. So I'm going to do that today, answer any questions you have, and just note that over the next 3 weeks, we'll really start to see things shake out. I expect that 2 weekends from now at the MMA annual meeting, Maya will announce their insurance rates. That's really the only remaining big unknown, and we'll talk a little bit about it. After that, the next time that we'll talk about the budget, I believe, is the Tri-Board meeting in February. At that point, we'll have basically a finalized budget. There will still be some remaining pieces, like at that point, we probably won't know Greater Lowell tax assessment. Nothing that will substantially change what we're looking to do. I talked a little bit in our last presentation about what the priorities are. Nothing has changed. So I'll cover what's new in this budget and then answer some questions. But I also wanted to talk about planning for our stabilization growth in the future. So I got a few slides on that. Stop me at any point, I'll answer any questions. You saw this slide at the last meeting, but I just want to start with it because this is the first year of the full debt impact of the middle school. As everybody remembers, and as I've talked about in great length, the commitment from the town was that we would contribute $1 million from the general fund to lower the annual debt service payment so that the amount that was actually being billed on top of your regular taxes is reduced. Over the course of the 30-year loan, obviously that's $30 million that will be paid within the tax levy, and so only 24, we haven't finalized the final number, 24 million will be borrowed on top of it. Obviously all of this, no matter where it comes from, is taxpayer money, but doing it in the levy means that you're still only paying that 2.5% increase every year. Anything above that, a debt exclusion, is on top of what you're already paying. So just to demonstrate this, the total debt service for fiscal 26 on the middle school is 2.9 million. 1 million of that's going to come from two sources: 900,000 from the operating budget, which if you look at our sample budget, you'll see that it's already coming off the top. And the school department is contributing 100,000 from the revenue they generate from the Lakeview lease to get us to that million. So what residents will actually see on their tax bill is their share of 1.97 million. In fiscal 25, the total debt service that residents saw on top of the tax bill was 1.83. That included the first, I'm calling it a partial payment on the middle school, as well as the final payments on the Tyngsborough High roof and the Tyngsborough Elementary School boiler. Moving forward, and until town meeting votes otherwise, the only excluded debt that we have on the books is the middle school. So you can expect that 1.9 slightly, it will come down slightly after the first couple of years, but it'll be in the 1.7, 1.9 range moving forward. Again, unless town meeting at a future date added new debt to the exempt debt. So I just want to start that because this is something that we've talked about quite a bit. The budget balances with that contribution. I'm going the wrong way. All right. We covered this slide. One of the things that we're trying to do with the budget is leave what I'm calling a cushion. There's a more appropriate accounting term, I'm sure, but it is not in anyone's best interest for me to budget to the penny. If I expect to get $1 million in revenue, it would be very poor decision making on my part to recommend that we spend $1 million, because if something takes a turn, you've now left no room for a cushion. all of that cushion ends up becoming part of our free cash, which we'll talk about later in the presentation, funds a variety of things, including our capital program and our stabilization fund. So in a perfect world, you'd have somewhere in the $250,000 to $350,000 cushion. This will be a tougher year, even in a best case scenario, so we'll be really lucky if we get to 2, maybe 150. That's still a very comfortable place to be, because as we talked about in our last presentation, we very conservatively budget our revenues. So even if we only left this budget with $150,000 to play, that's based on our very conservative estimates for revenue. So in all reality, once things shake out, you're probably looking at $650,000 to $700,000 in cushion, which again becomes part of your free cash and can be expended for a variety of purposes that we'll talk about. Again, we talked about this a little bit last time, but this worst case scenario balanced budget that I'm presenting assumes that there are no changes in our fixed expenses. So that's going to be the health insurance, which again, this budget includes a 10% increase. It never really lands at 10%. In previous years, we've budgeted 10 and it's come down to 4.8. This year will be tougher, I expect, and I expect that it will be closer to the 7, 7.5 range. Again, I won't know that number until a few weeks from now. And Greater Lowell Tech, we have a great school system. Once kids are in our school system, they generally stay here, so our assessment doesn't fluctuate. In some other communities, you see really large fluctuations. We're budgeting the same percent increase that we saw last year, which was 3.5%. In all reality, it'll probably come down to 3, maybe slightly lower. They don't finalize their budget until mid to late February, and they will come to a select board meeting and present their budget. Not that Tyngsborough has any authority over it, but that's when we'll find out what the true assessment is when they certify their enrollment projections. In the past, we've made a pretty substantial commitment to offsetting the expense, or to increasing how much money we can spend on roads by contributing from the general fund. We used to contribute $0, and over the last 6 years, we've gotten up to $300,000 annually, which is how much we contributed in fiscal '25. This budget assumes that we reduce that to only $200,000 in a worst case scenario. I'm sorry, reduce it down to $150,000. The Department of Public Works is only requesting $250,000 this year. In a worst case scenario, we would fund $150,000. I believe I've got another slide that talks about roads. So we'll cover why that won't have an impact on what we're planning. But in our budget, as all of you have seen, as we've talked about, that's really the only fat. I wouldn't even call it fat because it's not, it's used for really good purposes. But we don't have departments that have 5 people that I can lay 2 off. I mean, all of our departments are 1, 1.5. So if we have to make cuts, that's the easiest place to do it without having a direct impact on the level of service that residents expect. The police department requested 2 new cruiser leases. Many years ago, we made what I think is a wise decision to take cruiser leases out of the capital budget and to include in their operating budget because they're anticipated expenses. We know that at a certain mileage, we have to replace police cruisers. Instead of waiting 3 or 4 years and having a huge hit in 1 year, we have been very successfully budgeting these leases in the operating budget. In fiscal '26, they requested the second year payment on 2 leases. Obviously, I have to fund that unless we return them to the bank. And they requested 2 new cruiser leases. I've talked at length with the police chief. We have some flexibility and they can get by without any impact on service if we fund only 1 new cruiser lease this year. And then one of the things that we've seen a request for year over year is both full-time records position at the police department to help meet their statutory compliance with the public records law, and also full-time administrative support in the fire department. Up until 2 years ago, the fire department was our largest and only department that didn't have some level of administrative support. We added part-time support in fiscal year '24, and we continue that in fiscal '25. We have been able to, in fiscal '25, offset that budget by using a 5th firefighter on, which was a position that the select board and this committee and town meeting funded in fiscal '24. And we are comfortable, the fire chief is comfortable that for 25 hours a week, they're meeting their administrative needs. Largely, you're talking about accounts payable, payroll, helping schedule many of the inspections that the fire department does. So while they would both like a full-time position, the worst-case scenario budget that I'm presenting, which has the support of the police chief and the fire chief, creates 1 full-time position that really only has a net budget impact of 1 part-time position, because I'm taking a part-time position that already exists in fire and making it full-time so that it will now support the fire budget and the police department. So This budget doesn't include any new full-time positions, it only includes one half-time position. And again, that's in our public safety department. One of the things that I would point out, and I know, I'll answer any questions you have about it, on the records side, that the public records on the police department represents kind of one of our largest liabilities. Not only are they responsible under state law to respond in a certain amount of time, there's an added level of burden on the police side because they have so many records that can't be shared in certain circumstances. A lot of our records requests are DCF requests, and so now you're talking about children, there's even more. So you can't just pull an officer off the street and expect that they're gonna be familiar with all the applicable laws. Alternatively, you could pay at $200 an hour town council to review your public records requests. This is certainly the cheapest, and in the long run, it minimizes our exposure to litigation. Heaven forbid you release information that you're not supposed to. You're also talking about witness records, contact information for witnesses. So it's a critical position. It isn't what the police department needs in the long run, and so I expect 2 or 3 budgets down the road we'll be talking about that being a full-time position. But given our resources today, this will address the immediate need without throwing our budget completely off.
And in 25, you had someone for 25 hours already in
Correct.
the budget, so now you're just going to 40 hours.
Yes, I'm adding 15 new hours is the net impact on the budget.
Does that person sit at the police station or sit in the offices here? Where does that person sit, or travels back and forth?
It'll be perfectly split so that when they're working for the fire department, they'll be at the fire station, and when
Okay.
they're working for the police department, they'll be at the police department. There's 2 things to that. We have a few positions here at Town Hall that are split amongst departments. From a supervisory perspective, it makes much more sense if they're sitting where they're being supervised. Additionally, there are some records in the police department that, for obvious reasons, can only be accessed from the police department. So this will provide a clear delineation of responsibilities. It'll give a sense of kind of reliability to the fire chief. We'll know exactly when the person will be there, and it'll give them the access.
And
that
the
they
cost is
require.
probably split 50-50? Or
25 of the hours
15
will be
still?
funded by fire,
Still,
and 15
okay.
will be funded by police.
Okay.
Yeah.
Are you adding benefits, health insurance and stuff by going from a part-time to a full-time employee with that?
Correct. Well, I can't say yes for certain. Obviously, I don't. We haven't hired the position yet, so I don't know if the person will take health insurance, and you're not obviously allowed to ask that. But our budget includes an assumption that health insurance, for a worst-case scenario, that they accept a family plan, which costs the town about 20 grand. Our health insurance budget's always, because the trouble with health insurance is, I can tell you how many employees are enrolled today, and I can even tell you the day before town meeting how many are enrolled. What I can't predict in the budget, and why we build in flexibility on the health insurance front, is if somebody has a qualifying event that then requires them to join our health insurance, if we hire a new person and they're replacing someone who was never on it, so we always build in the flexibility to cover a handful of new employees. So I'm not increasing any parts of the budget, but you are correct. Hypothetically speaking, it is possible that we will spend more on health insurance because the position is now full-time. And to actually go back even further, it's not really a new risk because the fire department had a 20-hour-a-week employee funded in here, and at 19 under state law they're eligible for benefits. So we haven't filled the position,
Okay, all
but
right.
even if I only filled the 20-hour-a-week position, hypothetically that person could take health insurance. But we don't have the position filled, so it would be a new liability.
Okay.
But again, I'm not increasing the budget to accommodate that because we build in that level of flexibility. In this worst case scenario, that cushion I'm talking about is much less than I would like, and that's $75,000. In fiscal '24, the budget was closed with $50,000 in that cushion. We ended the year much better. Again, we always end the year much better, but when town meeting approved the budget, there was only $50,000 to play with. Wasn't my budget, I wouldn't have been comfortable with that,
And
but
this
it
is
worked.
only 75,
It is
you're
only
saying,
75.
Wow.
And again, remember something. This is the worst case scenario. I would bet money today
Yep.
that health insurance is going to come down. And if you look at the best case scenario, I'm not adding anything new. The only difference between my worst case scenario budget is what that cushion will be.
Yeah, yeah, you could have the 500,000-600,000 revenue cushion on this 75,000.
Correct.
Okay, and your health insurance could open that gap, okay.
I would be willing to bet some level of money that the health
Some
insurance
level, some
increase
level of money.
will be probably 2.5 to 3% less than what we're expecting.
Okay,
And that closes the gap in terms of what I'm comfortable with for.
okay.
Now, in a best case scenario, not much changes here except that I would up our contribution to the general fund contribution for roads. And in that situation, we would still land $150,000 with that cushion, which isn't perfect, but for the first year of the $1 million contribution to the middle school, I will take this any day. That assumes, of course, that health insurance comes down, which again, I'm comfortable saying it will by at least 2%, if not more, and the Greater Lowell Tech assessment comes down. One of the areas where we also generally have some level of play, but I expect less level of play this year, is in our property insurance. We also don't get those rates until February, and we always budget for a 10% increase. It generally comes down substantially less than that. However, I think I said this to you, I certainly presented to the select board on the 6th. This fiscal 26 will be the first year that the town is insuring the new $84 million middle school. So our property insurance is going to go way up because we're replacing what I think the insurance company has valued as like a $10 million middle school with now an $84 million middle school, and so obviously our bill will go up. So even though we'll see that 10% increase come down quite a bit, it's going to get eaten up by the fact that this is the first year we're insuring an $84 million middle school. It is insured today. It's insured under the builder's risk, which is covered by the project. I don't want people to think that we have an uninsured building, but it's
You
not
talk
in the operating budget.
about expenses maybe changing before we finalize it. Do you feel pretty good? Is the revenue pretty stable now, or you think that'll change much between the next few months either?
I think that the revenue is pretty stable at this point,
Okay.
only because we take such a conservative approach to it.
Yep.
I think there will be some wiggling out of numbers that may let me be a little bit more aggressive on the revenue predictions, but every day of the week I'd much rather say to you at the end of the fiscal year we closed at $600,000 more than we expected than to say we fell short even 50 grand.
If your expenses come down by 200 or 300, will you
Exactly.
reduce the revenue by 2 or 3 in your plan?
Correct.
Okay.
Correct.
And you'll keep that 50, 75K gap.
Exactly. The great part about our expenses this year is, and I know I noted this in our first presentation, all of our labor costs are almost completely certain. The only remaining contract to negotiate is our fire contract, and I fully expect that we'll have it potentially even this week in our next bargaining session. But we're also in a really positive place because last year we settled 6 contracts and all of them were settled in that same ballpark. So it's not like I would expect a huge outlier number in fire because they've already seen where we've settled. That's the beauty of public contracts, is that once they're ratified, they become public. So it makes things honestly a lot easier because if I gave 6 bargaining units 11% over 3 years, it's hard to argue that with another bargaining unit unless everyone's different. But
Is every employee under some kind of bargaining, every employee, or is
a
it?
majority of them are. I can't speak on the school side. Certainly, a majority of
Yep.
them are. On the town side, a majority of them are. The only ones that aren't, I think it's maybe 5 or 6. My office is not.
Yep.
The finance director isn't. The human resources office isn't, and our superintendent of public works isn't.
And you probably
Everybody else
recommend
is.
those increases yourself, or?
Correct. Those are also set. One of the things that I started doing last year, those now all include set increases during the duration of their agreement. So they're all contract employees that have, so we know what their expenses, what their salaries will
Okay.
be. In years past, we played kind of an unfair game where we settled the collective bargaining agreements, we didn't put salary increases built into non-union contracts, and then at the end of the year, we were like, well, we can give you 1.5%. And so we were losing the non-union positions, and you never hire somebody less than what you paid the last person. So now all of our contracts, and anyone that wants to view them, they're all on the town website.
Okay.
Salaries are public, we publish a year-end salary report, and the contracts are set. So there's no uncertainty on that front.
Good.
All right. I want to just quickly highlight, because roads are obviously a very sensitive subject, I want to highlight why us playing with the general fund contribution will have zero impact on what we've already planned. For starters, we have one employee responsible for designing roads projects, so even if you gave me $10 million tomorrow, I don't have the staff capacity to design $10 million worth of roads projects in 1 year, or to supervise them. So I like to just get that, to dispel that right on the offset. What you're seeing right here is what was included in what our plan for funding for the fiscal year 26 program is. So general fund, the Department of Public Works requested $250,000. Every year, thanks to stagnant funds from the legislature, we get $400,000 in Chapter 90. That's the primary bucket of state funding to pave roads, and up until I'd say probably 2017, that's all we used. So you're getting like half of a road, maybe a really short road. The Fair Share Amendment, otherwise known as the millionaires tax, a portion of that is reserved for education, and that goes directly through state aid to education, but a portion of it is reserved for transportation expenses. And so Tyngsborough's share of the transportation piece is $250,000. That's money that up until fiscal 24 we weren't receiving, And so, even if we stopped funding from the operating budget anything, we were being made whole by this new source of revenue. And again, this is taxpayer money, but it's coming from the state, it's not on your property tax bill. And then road stabilization, the greatest thing that we ever did was dedicate 75% of marijuana excise to the road stabilization account. That money automatically every quarter when we get our excise tax payment, 75% goes into this account. And every year at town meeting, we ask town meeting to allocate $800,000. So this assumes no change. The total available funds would be $1.7 million. Our fiscal year 26 capital plan for roads is only $1.15 million. Now, we would not just fund the 1.1 because once you tear up a road, there are usually conditions that you weren't aware of that you have to address. But also, one of the things that we've taken as a part of our approach is, before, when we only had $400,000 to play with, we were barely making a dent on our failed roads. In 2019, when we hired our first full-time engineer, we switched our approach to say, look, we're going to spend more of our money on preservation so that less roads become failed, and as we can, we'll chip away at the failed roads, because eventually, if you're only addressing the failed roads, every one of your roads will be failed. So we're spending much more money now on preservation. So these are roads that you may drive down and you get annoyed because you hit one pothole, but it's in relatively okay shape. By spending the money now, we're preventing it from being failed, and then we're saving a bucket of money to hit those failed roads. Our plan, as you can see here, we've got preservation work, which is that maintaining the good to fair condition roads. Westford Road, $450,000. Full depth reclamation is when we're completely redoing a road. So we're hitting, these are some pretty bad streets, Elm, Oak, Pine, Bridget, and Lincoln. They're off Long Pond, kind of on the Drake at Tyngsborough line. That's $650,000. The wiggle room here is that, for instance, in fiscal 25, we added 2 very small roads that were in failed condition. Once we put a bid out, we get the numbers back, we're confident on the number. Our engineering department may have $300,000 left over. They'll seek to use that $300,000 to address those failed roads. So it's not something we planned for in the fiscal year. It's a great surprise if you live on the road. But when the numbers work out in our favor, we're able to do that. So I would never recommend depleting the road program funding to match exactly what we were expecting. But even if I drop that $250,000 to $150,000, you're still talking about $1.5 million, which leaves plenty of a buffer to address drainage, conditions we weren't expecting, but also to help us touch roads that maybe weren't in the plan.
Do you have a lot of failed roads, or is
Yeah.
this, and then who prioritizes which ones you do? Yeah.
We hired a consultant 2 years ago using a grant that assessed every single one of our roads, and that software, which will eventually be on the town's website, you can look at the condition of your road, it's called Baden. It helps us figure out a plan that fits within our budget, touches the most mile of road, and incrementally addresses the failed roads.
So the Drake water supply is, they're digging up roads pretty constantly, putting in new water main
Yeah.
and et cetera. And then they're patching them. Will they eventually redo the road and put it all the way back as a new road, or do they just stop at the patch, and is it on us to complete the road after?
Great question. Legally, it's on us to complete the road after. However, what we've done in the past and what we've discussed with the district doing for Malvern and those streets on the lake that are being torn up right now is, if they were going to spend $300,000 on the patches and it's an additional $150,000 to do the full length of the road, we'll chip in the balance and they'll use their contractors so that we're getting the whole length of the road. We've done that with the sewer commission before on Coburn when they tore a part of the road. We don't have any legal means to force them to pave curb to curb. Sometimes with the private developers, we did this with Toll Brothers, we'll get them to do the whole lane. So when Toll Brothers tore up Sherburne and part of Pawtucket Boulevard, they had an agreement with us and the state to do the whole travel lane. But we don't, because the water district is like a quasi-governmental agency, we don't have the authority to make them do anything more than just the stretch of road that they tore up. But what we will do is throw in some money on our end to make it worth their while to do the whole road.
Okay.
And that's a common practice. Yeah, that's why leaving some flexibility in the budget is good. Another great example is over the summer this year, Chelmsford was paving their portion of Dunstable Road, and there's a portion of Tyngsborough in between 2 sections of Chelmsford. It would have cost us on our own, when you think about mobilizing and putting the project out to bid, probably $200,000 to do our stretch. But because they had already mobilized their crews, we gave them, I think, 75 grand, and they just did the Tyngsborough stretch while they were on the way. So we try to get creative with the funding, but in a case like that, we would work with the district to get the whole road paved. Especially those roads right now, they're working on, they're so narrow
Yeah,
that it would really be. Because the other piece and why we have a road impact fee is if you only repair the part that you cut open, the road is now gonna deteriorate much faster than if you did the whole
Right.
thing. And then in 5 years, we'll be looking at a failed road.
yeah, because I'm looking at what they're doing, and
Yeah.
I'm like, okay, this is bad,
Yeah,
if it stays that way.
Well, the thing is though, when I do that first small patch, they have to let that sit for 6 months anyway, to settle.
Okay.
You know what I mean, that's not, they can never do a thing, that's why the boulevard was like that for a long time, then once, after 6 to 8 months, it all settles, then they go back and,
right.
Okay.
people just heat now.
Yeah, I've got one other, I guess, non-related question, which is, with the police cruiser, so that new lease are we adding a cruiser to the fleet, or are we replacing an existing cruiser?
Replacing an existing cruiser and so it's got a hand-me-down effect. Right now, the biggest issue, or not the biggest issue, the biggest priority for police and what these leases do is replace our frontline cruisers. Those are the 6 that are in service 24/7, well, 3 they rotate between, but there's 6 frontline cruisers. These leases are for those. But once those are pulled, so if I give them one new lease, they're gonna take probably a 2018 out of the front line, and instead of trading it in for pennies, because we get no money when we trade these things in, it will replace a 2010 Ford Taurus that's being used in our administrative services division. Those aren't running 24/7. They're not frontline vehicles. They take detectives to calls, or they're used for school resource officers. So our total vehicle count will be the same, and we'll recycle essentially a frontline cruiser that doesn't need to be top line anymore because it's going to be pushed down to administrative services. That 2010 Taurus will do a surplus auction and, get a couple grand for it.
So I had a line of questioning that you've already answered most of.
Excellent.
Because my question, I saw a police cruiser and I saw a lease, and I'm like, wait a minute, like, how many miles in a year do the police put on those cars, and does leasing even make sense? But if you're buying a lease out in the end, if you're going in without intent, then it actually would, so.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought this up because municipal leases are different than your average consumer lease. Really, they created this law around municipal leases for vehicles to essentially separate it out from borrowing. Essentially what we're doing is borrowing at a very low interest rate from a bank. We own the vehicle, but this avoids us, generally a municipality to do borrowing has to go to town meeting, get town meeting appropriation, and then it's a little bit more complicated. So some point in 2011, 2012, the state adopted this municipal lease for vehicles. So it isn't your traditional lease, and for $1 at the end of the lease, we own it and rotate it down.
Okay, so it's really, it's in effect a purchase.
Correct.
In reality, but on paper, for accounting purposes,
Yes.
it's a lease. Okay,
Yes.
perfect,
Yep.
okay.
Any other questions about roads before I move on? Before I talk about our financial reserves, I just want to quickly talk about the budget. If you look at that's not the right one. If you look at the budget, which this is too small for any of you to see, you'll notice that the largest increase is under facilities, public buildings. It's a 75.6% increase. That is not because we are increasing that line item. With the consolidation of the Department of Public Works, which was passed after we approved the fiscal 25 budget, we're taking 3 positions that were funded out of the Highway Department's budget and putting them into facilities to more accurately reflect where those costs are. So those are employees that are in the facilities division. One is full-time, one is basically full-time, and one is part-time. Those aren't new positions. Those positions existed in this fiscal 20. We're just shifting the location.
One goes up 122K, one goes down
Correct.
102K, and
The other piece is that to truly represent, because one of the things we started doing in fiscal 25 that we'll continue to do is really showing you, Eric Eldridge on Select Board likes pie charts, showing you where your tax dollars are going. We also shifted, up until this budget, every department that had their own building had their own facilities budget line. So police had money for building maintenance, the library had money for building maintenance. Because we now have a consolidated facilities division, all of those funds now show up here. So we're not adding new positions to facilities, we're just accurately reflecting it. But that's a huge increase, so I wanted to just clarify that number as well. The only other real large increases you're seeing are on software. Our IT department has all of the software for town except for the school side, and all of our primary software that we use is OpenGov. It's our online permitting software. We use it for licensing now. We've been shifting a lot of things, kind of consolidating a bunch of different online platforms to one. Those fees go up, quite dramatically every year, but it makes it a lot more efficient for residents. And if we left OpenGov and tried to find a new permitting software, you'd be dealing with kind of the same large increases. So this is not the final version. It is on the town's website if folks wanted to see it.
What's in the personnel line? Who's in personnel?
Also,
And
yeah.
I know there's insurance, I read that little email,
Yes.
Retirement, unemployment, but are there people and salaries in that too?
One.
There's one person?
Yeah, so the
Okay.
personnel budget, there's only one full-time employee in there.
Okay.
Those increases you're seeing is, that budget includes the health insurance, workers' comp. It also, for reasons that I can't totally explain, and maybe we have to fix this, it includes all of our risk management, so property insurance is in there.
So maybe we just need to relabel it.
You only have one employee in there.
Yeah.
And like a $500 office expense. The rest of it is your workers' comp. Also in there is police and fire accidental insurance. Those are above and beyond, due to the nature of their work, above and beyond the insurance that we
Can you
carry.
just break it out into 2 or 3 separate line items? Is it clearer for people?
Yeah, we probably could do that.
Instead of just calling it personnel, call it
Yeah.
insurance, call it that, right? It just makes it easier maybe.
Absolutely.
Okay.
And the other thing I'll note, that includes, on the operating budget, we carry all of the insurance costs for the school department. So there's, when we get to the end of the presentation, or the end of the budget process, we have a slide that shows the true breakdown. That's something we added last year. But those increases aren't just the insurance for the employees on the general government side. For as long as Tyngsborough has been budgeting, the school department's insurance is also included in this budget. So I don't want people to see it and say, wait a minute, the town's insurance is going up this much money. That's for every single insurance account in the town. It's not included in the school's budget.
And was there a reclass this year? That's why, is there something that changed, why it went up so much, or no?
No, this is us assuming that dramatic increase on health insurance,
Got it.
property insurance.
Okay.
Is there, just out of curiosity, is there a practical reason why that one school department expense is over there? Or is it just a
I mean, I wouldn't wanna
historical thing?
It's not uncommon.
Yeah.
It's very common that the municipal budget includes it. Some municipalities, and I'm not advocating for this path at all, some municipalities, most notably Drake at last budget cycle, try to do chargebacks where you try to account for every penny you charge back to the school. Ultimately though, whether I put I think they represent 82% of our health insurance. If I put that in the school's budget, it's still coming out of taxpayers'
Yeah,
money.
yeah.
And it would be unreasonable for me to say, okay, well, you've got to reduce your budget now by that same dollar amount to make that 2.7. It's how we've always done it. We have started though, last year we put together a slide showing it to just really help people see where the money's going. And it is kind of different that their budget won't include that, it's just in here. But it's not uncommon, Tyngsborough is certainly not unique. Alright, the last slides that I wanted to cover talk about our long-term planning for stabilization. And maybe it's not gonna let me reopen it, so that's wonderful. There we go. Alright. Okay, so on top of figuring out our operating budget for fiscal '26, one of the things that I expect that we'll discuss at length in the February 24th tri-board meeting between Select Board, School Committee, and Finance is setting up a plan for maintaining our financial reserves moving forward and managing what I expect will be conversations about future debt. Obviously, I think everybody probably knows the Select Board has talked about the need for a new fire station. That there's really only one way to fund that, that'd be through a debt exclusion. But in the meantime, we have to start to get kind of intentional about how we're managing our stabilization. So the town has a policy about our financial reserves. On page 27 of the financial policies, which were adopted in 2018, it aims to achieve between 5 and 10% of our general fund appropriations in overall reserves. And for the purpose of this policy, It's talking about our free cash, which is that money I talked about earlier that the town could have spent but didn't spend, and our general stabilization. Currently, our reserve totals are just under $4.8 million. That's the combination of where we expect our free cash to be once it's certified in a few weeks, and where we know the balances of our general stabilization fund.
And do you refer to that, just for me, my knowledge, that
Yeah.
4.8 million, that's your stabilization fund, stabilization plus free cash equals?
I don't.
What do you refer to, is that my rainy day fund, what's the 4.8?
The 4.8 is, I wouldn't know how to answer that. To be honest with you, I don't know why we said, our stabilization fund, what I consider the stabilization fund, money strictly reserved for stabilizing the town's budget is 2.9.
Okay.
That 1.8 number it changes every year.
Yep.
It's only available once the Department of Revenue certifies it. I'm sure there is an accounting reason why the financial policies we adopted in 2018, which I'm sure we copied from other communities, tallies them both.
Okay.
But I would not, that 4.7 I would not call our reserves,
Okay.
because technically that 1.8 isn't available till DOR says it's available.
Okay.
And I already have plans, we'll see on another slide, to spend some of it, so I don't think it's an accurate representation, but for
Got
the
it.
purposes of our policy,
Okay.
the proposed budget is 51.8 million, 5% of that would be 2.6, and 10% would be 5.1. So we're well within that range,
Yeah.
but we have some work to do, just a little bit, to get to 10%. What I'm more interested in is what the bond rating agencies think. Maintaining a positive bond rating obviously helps us with interest rates. We have what is really for us right now the highest bond rating that we can get. If we increase dramatically our general stabilization, and if our budget continues to increase, we could get to a AAA. I don't think we need to strive for that. We get really good interest rates right now. But one of the things that could get us there is if our general fund stabilization, which is truly the stabilization, just that 2.9 number, if that was equal to 7% of the general fund appropriations. So again, it's 2.9 million, that's in there as of the end of last fiscal year. We didn't deposit any money into it, so that'll be the same balance at the end of this fiscal year, unless we put free cash, which I'll show you in a moment, into it. 7% of our operating budget would be 3.6 million, so we've got some work to do getting us to the 7%, and I do believe, and I will recommend, as you can see, a plan to get us there eventually. How I would achieve that is in fiscal 26, I expect to ask town meeting to appropriate $300,000 to our general stabilization account, which will get us to 6.4%, and then for the next 2 years, I'd recommend an additional $300,000. What this doesn't take into account is, obviously the budget will increase slightly. I'm assuming a 3% increase here in these two bottom numbers, but if at some point in the next 5 years the town did adopt or approve a debt exclusion for a new fire station, obviously that's gonna balloon, and so we'll have to reconsider that. $300,000 a year is manageable. We haven't deposited into stabilization in probably 3 years at this point, and it's something that we really should be doing. Not only is it good for our bond rating, but if we hit a really tricky year, we'd have some wiggle room. You only touch stabilization in a really worst case scenario.
So when you say that's the same number for the past 3 years, that 2.9?
Which is good because we haven't spent it, but on the same hand, we haven't put anything else into it.
Okay.
But yes, it's been 2.9 since fiscal 22.
And again, my mind, I'm thinking, that's a cash balance, 2.9?
Correct.
And that's sitting there making interest somewhere?
Correct, and the interest is reflected on the revenue trend under earnings on investments.
Got it.
Which is doing really well right now.
And that interest doesn't go into stabilization
It doesn't.
fund? Okay.
Correct, yeah, it goes into the general revenue.
Got it.
I guess the town could adopt a policy to reinvest it, but at that point, you're kinda just moving money
Yeah,
around.
I get it.
Alright, so that's general stabilization. I think the select board has made it clear that a priority for them in this upcoming budget is to put more money into stabilization, and so I expect that it'll be met favorably with them. The remaining financial reserves, road maintenance stabilization, this one we never have to put money into, again, because town meeting set a revenue dedication, automatically 75% of the excise tax goes into it. Its balance, as of the end of this fiscal year, will be 1.2 million, and then we will allocate probably $800,000, so it'll drop back down to 400,000. The numbers will change slightly, because at some point in the next few weeks, Yellow House will open. It won't double, but we will start to see a little bit more revenue in there. Capital asset stabilization is at almost not even close to a million. I would be looking to deposit from free cash 200,000. We also haven't touched capital asset stabilization in a few years, again, because of the availability of the ARPA funds. But I expect, for instance, in the next 2 years, we're gonna have to replace a ladder truck. Those are like 1.4, 1.5 million, and that's more than we spend generally in a year on capital. So we may need to leverage some of it down the road.
And that comes out of your revenues, that money's?
Yeah,
To put 200 to capital asset, it's gonna come somewhere from your
From
revenues.
free
that
cash.
you're allocating, okay,
correct.
okay.
Yeah. Debt stabilization is an account that's existed for a long time, but we never had any money into it. Last year was the first year we invested in it because we knew that we were gonna have to start meeting that $1 million contribution on the middle school, and we wanted to add flexibility. So right now, there's 200,000, I'd be asking town meeting to put another $200,000 in it. The compensated absence fund is, I don't really consider it a reserve, it's a helpful tool that we established several years ago because particularly on the police and fire side, you have a lot of employees that have been with the town for over 10, 15 years who were hired before we started capping the amount of sick time you can accrue. And so, for instance, we had a retirement in the police department this year, and the payout was like $73,000 because of accrued sick and vacation time. Obviously, we can't budget in the operating budget those payouts, and we don't always know when someone plans on retiring. That's where the compensated absence fund comes in. It's controlled by a vote of the select board. So in that case, we were able to ask the select board to allocate $70,000 from the compensated absence fund to cover that payout. So the balance right now is only $64,000. You know, I would expect in the next 3 years we'll probably see another 2, maybe 3 longer serving public safety employees retire. And we're gonna wanna start building that up. Nobody currently has on the books more than $30,000 in payouts, but if 2 people retire next year, I've now depleted the fund. So I'd be looking to put $50,000 from free cash in there. Again, we only touch this in those unique circumstances, and the options are either you drain an operating budget or you use the compensated absence fund. Special ed stabilization is another one that was established a few years ago. One of the biggest unknowns in the school budget is our out-of-district placement costs. Those are when we have to send a student outside of the district to get services that we can't provide. Those can be very costly. You're talking about the cost to transport one student, the services that they require, and so it gets really hard year over year to budget for the exact number, particularly if somebody moves into the district halfway through the year. If you didn't plan for it, you're now depleting the school's budget. So we created this special ed stabilization fund, and I would say consistently over the last 3 fiscal years, we've allocated between 100 and 150,000 to offset the school's costs. So I'd be looking, right now there's 134 in there, that's a healthy balance, but I'd be looking to put an additional 150,000 in because while we have the free cash, we might as well start building it up so that we don't have an unanticipated big hit. OPEB is the other post-employment benefits fund. This number, we put 52,500 in every year based on an actuarial analysis that was done by the firm that manages our OPEB. And these cover the retirement costs for certain classes of employees. So that money doesn't get spent on anything other than meeting our OPEB contributions. And then finally, stormwater stabilization is a small one. It fluctuates year over year. I'm only recommending $10,000 this year because this helps support our efforts to comply with the NIPD's permit, which is a stormwater permit that EPA promulgated and Mass DEP enforces. We are moving into a new administration on the federal level, so I expect that some of those regulations will change slightly, so I don't expect that we need to put too much in there. We also fund compliance in the operating budget. So this is kind of like, you know, in a worst case scenario, if we got hit with an unexpected expense or had to show compliance through some expensive test, there's money there. We're not talking big money. I think last year town meeting appropriated 10 grand to be spent. Now, this doesn't, so I'm expecting, and I'm glad Dave Andrews isn't here tonight because he'd yell at me for saying this, I think we're gonna have about 1.8 million in free cash. It will likely be higher, but I'm preparing for a worst case scenario. This still leaves, I left my numbers on my desk, but I think it leaves like $450,000, $500,000 untouched. Free cash never disappears. It will just add on to whatever the balance that's certified the following fiscal year is. So I'm not recommending
So
that.
what do you start the year off with free cash? If you're gonna end at 1.8?
0.
Start
It
at
resets every year
okay.
until DOR recertifies it. But we went in, so on paper it was 0.
Yeah.
But sitting out there waiting for DOR to certify was something like 375.
And then you're gonna be revenue by six something this year,
Correct.
so that goes up, and
Yep.
then you're probably underspending expenditure somehow.
Yeah, we generally underspend by like 250,000.
So that's the combination to
Yeah.
get to this 1.8, and the 1.8 is what's funding,
All these different
and
aspects.
that's why they don't show up as expenditures, it's just a balance sheet transfer.
Correct. And it is a town meeting warrant article. Voters,
Yep.
it's not part of the operating budget, but it is a separate article. Generally, there's two, one that will fund these stabilization accounts and one that will fund aspects of the capital plan. I expect to ask town meeting to allocate about $400,000, as we discussed last time, from free cash to the capital plan.
Good, very thorough.
That's all I have so far. We will go over this in much more length and talk about kind of future year commitments in that tri-board meeting, but I wanted to at least have given one kind of rundown of it.
Yeah. Every time I print that out and
Yeah.
read it all again.
And again, for folks watching at home, it's all on the town's website. Tomorrow we have a news post on the website and social media that will direct you to the budget page. Obviously, we'll keep adding things as they go. I expect that by your tri-board meeting, we'll have what will likely be the closest to final budget version. But again, I don't expect that any new items will come up between then. So the worst case scenario and the best case scenario, they didn't change in terms of what I'm funding. It kind of just changed the roads and how much cushion we left. So not an exciting budget year because we did it kind of tight, but
I like it, it's good.
All good,
excellent. That's all I got, Mr. Chair.
good job.
Thank
Yeah.
you.
Motion to adjourn?
Second. Well, that was a question. Is there a second?
Second.
Yes.
Second. All right, all in favor of adjourning?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? We are adjourned.
Thank you, good night.
All right, hold on.